Vaush is an online leftist political streamer. He comments on all sorts of topics, usually about politics, but also larger cultural issues and once in a while pop culture. In one of his videos, he reacted to and criticized Friday Night Tights, a weekly pop culture/comedy podcast hosted by Nerdrotic and co-hosted by several other YouTubers. I'm a fan of the show as it blends discussions about larger pop culture topics with offensive humor that you would be hard-pressed to find in more mainstream circles. The chemistry between the hosts is great, and it's always fun to see what hijinks and arguments the fellowship gets into. In one particular video, Vaush reacts to a segment in which the Friday Night Tights crew is criticizing and making fun of Black Aragorn in the Magic the Gathering Lord of the Rings card set tie-in. He goes on to call them bigots and a whole host of other names. In this video, he makes some pretty poor arguments which we shall discuss. I'm not going over the full video, but the relevant parts, so for the full context, I suggest you watch the original video. Link is in the description below. The beginning of the video has a few interesting remarks, but we will skip them for now. We will come back to them later.
King of Gondor.
Oh, Aragorn, King of Gondor. There we go. Like right off the bat, huh? Damn. That was pretty straight out with it, wasn't it? Just say the N-word, dude. You know you can just say.
His first objection is when Ryan Kennel says King of Gondor and calls it racist. For those who don't know, I will explain the context. Essentially, there was a movement to learn more about the kings and kingdoms of Africa before colonization. We all know many European kings and a few leaders in the East like Genghis Khan. However, when it comes to Africa, it seems like people knew a lot less. So focus was put on discovering and showcasing these figures. However, soon this movement went on to claim many more rulers and kingdoms as black. It became pretty blatant, soon delving into all sorts of conspiracies or obfuscation to call many historical figures black who weren't. This has recently been seen in various media, often in historical documentaries or dramas. The general premise or motto being, "We were kings," which, when some people said it, sounded like "we was kings," whether it be Cleopatra in the Netflix show, Anne Boleyn, or the few people who think Wakanda's a real place, or that something similar might have existed. But it was seen enough times, and what Ryan does here is draw the parallel between this movement on the internet, of taking rulers and claiming they were African, to what Magic the Gathering did, and many people are attempting to do now, which is taking a white character, Aragorn the King of Gondor, and race-bending the character to be black. Thus, the joke draws a parallel, and makes the joke by calling him King of Gondor. Pretty clever. Unfortunately, instead of this, he should have just said the N-word. What the fuck? Vaush has a history of making edgy jokes and defending edgy jokes, so to jump the gun immediately is strange.
I think in regards to, I think when it comes to comedy, you can joke about absolutely anything and everything.
I just want to say, I've joked. Oh, sorry, please. I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
I joke about different groups of people all the time on my stream. I've joked about transgender people. I've joked about black people. I've joked about Jews. Oh boy, have I done all of those things. I think that we should be able to make jokes about anything, literally anything. I would defend that to my dying breath. And I hate that there are some lefties who are legitimately like humorless fucking bad words.
It seems that because Vaush agrees with the tie-in, he can make jokes. We shall see his attempt at comedy later, but because Ryan disagrees, he can no longer do it. Not off to a strong start.
Is actually a form of racism, because you cannot tell me these assholes did not do this just for the reaction.
Wizards of the Coast.
I like that one. Wizards of the Coast did this because they knew that frothing retards like us would get angry over it. Grr. How dare they know exactly what our stupid brains turn to. Like,
you can call out or even mock the reaction as predictable, as Vaush does here. But let's not pretend that we would not be able to equally predict the outrage that would occur if we just started whitewashing characters. The reaction would be just as loud. Heck, probably even worse and more unhinged. Even in situations where there is no whitewashing. Remember the people who got upset at Matt Damon for playing a traveler who goes to China in a Chinese co-production. Just because you can predict some outrage does not inherently make said outrage or anger unjust, as with the whitewashing example, which will obviously draw outrage, but saying that the anger is predictable tells us nothing.
You've been against race swapping characters for no reason, like Superman, for example. So yeah, I'll explain. The difference there is that A, this is a tie-in deal where they got the licensing rights to a pre-existing property, meaning that there's no reason for them to create new characters. Like, if you're Marvel and you're just like doing comic runs and you want to have more black representation, I think you should make new characters rather than just like retconning or reimagining existing white characters as black, because that's just kind of weak shit, you know? But in this case, they literally paid for a licensing deal. Like, the idea of them getting Lord of the Rings licensing permissions and then go like, here's my OC is like really dumb.
This is where the crux of Vaush's arguments begin. They're not very good. The first argument is that this is a tie-in deal, meaning that Magic the Gathering would want the actual named characters as part of their set. So in order to have diversity, race-bending said characters is inevitable, because no one would recognize any new original characters, defeating the purpose of the tie-in. However, when looking at the actual cards contained within the sets, we see that many of them are not actual characters, but groups within Lord of the Rings. Thus, Magic the Gathering is not restricted to simply named characters, so naturally Magic the Gathering could include the Harad and Easterlings, meaning that they would not have to race-bend any characters. But in this version, many characters are race-bent, meaning that the individuals behind this were more interested in forced diversity than anything else. An authentic interpretation was not on their checklist, so the tie-in point is mute.
Second of all, with a character like Superman, Superman has been depicted in approximately 15 squintillion comics and movies and TV shows and blah, 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 and we all know exactly what he looks like in our head. We have a pretty strong mental image. Aragorn has been in like one movie? Like, I don't think there's a canon appearance for Aragorn, right? Like, there's the movies, but then if you go back and you watch like the animated show for The Lord of the Rings, which I remember watching when I was a kid, or like The Hobbit, people look different.
This is where we start getting into the truly strange arguments. We would expect it to be the opposite. Given that Superman has so many different versions and depictions, it would be much easier to deviate from the nominal depiction, as small changes over time could eventually lead to significant deviations when the total changes are summed up. And we do see this in comics, with different versions, different runs of characters, one-offs, alternate dimensions, and whatnot. The fact that quintillion different depictions exist of Superman makes it easier for any specific person to make changes. This could also include characters like Spider-Man or Batman. Meanwhile, when a character only exists in a few pieces of media, it will be very difficult to change him or her, as doing so will immediately be more noticeable. Just because Aragorn has only one set of movies does not give you license to just change his race in other media. If we took this logic for other characters, it would be easy to see why the argument is so ludicrous. Hey, we're making a comic book for Interstellar, but given that there's only one depiction of Cooper, we are allowed to race bend said character. Because canonically, who even know what the character is supposed to look like? We could do this with Neo or Cobb. Like, who the hell even knows what Neo canonically looks like? With this logic, you'd expect that Vaush would not be in favor of a black James Bond, given how many numerous depictions there are. To be fair, his analysis of this topic is more than what you would expect. But he endorses a cautious approach depending on how said themes are handled. But he never once makes the argument that given the numerous depictions of Bond, the character is no longer up for race swapping.
This is one of those things, I don't want to be misinterpreted as like saying, I think that only white people should play Bond. It's just that I feel like there's an element to this that needs to be taken into consideration and done well. And if it's done well, it'll be better than any previous Bond film. Because, like, let's be real, okay? Bond films aren't that good.
This take was 2 years ago compared to the video being a year old. He's free to change his mind in between then, yet it still seems that Vaush just came up with this talking point. I seriously doubt that the number of depictions factor in when Vaush will make his case for race-bending characters, just what optically somebody would be able to get away with. And even if, let's say, for argument's sake, that James Gunn's Superman Legacy featured a black Superman, do we genuinely believe that Vaush would be against said change? He might express some trepidation or concern, but eventually when Nerdrotic and crew would go on to make fun of the decision, I'm guessing he would have the same reaction as he does here, and most likely use the argument about how many different versions of the character exist to justify the race bending.
Here is how he is described in the book. Although the series offers very few details on Aragorn's physical appearance, we know he is tall and lean, with a shaggy head of dark hair flecked with gray, in a pale stern face, a pair of keen gray eyes. Hold on. I'm noticing something pretty woke here. Hold on. His eyes are blue in the movie, not gray. Why the did they overwrite the book description in the live action adaptation? They said his eyes were gray. This is clearly blue. Woke. You see the point that I'm trying to make here?
We move on to the eye color argument. I will say this is a recent argument that has been popping up, which is that of eye color. And when it comes to the various arguments people make in favor of race-bending characters, this for me is one of the weaker arguments, which is one's equivocation that changing a character's eye color is the same degree of magnitude as changing a character's race. And because the two are the same, if you only get angry with the changing of skin color, you are racist. Fucking no. This argument is so ridiculous. Nobody actually believes that changing the eye color of a character is the same as changing a character's race. Unless we are talking about a dojutsu from Naruto, which we are not. Characters are composed of various elements and physical characteristics. And these physical characteristics can be important, or they could be somewhat irrelevant for the identification of a character. For example, you could have a character that is bald in the books, but then maybe has some hair in the live-action adaptation. Usually changes in this vein are made for logistical reasons. A specific person might embody the character so well that it's worth the minor trade-off to do so. However, a change like this is purely made for ideological reasons, given that the artist is not constrained by real-life limitations. Furthermore, if we were to whitewash a character, and then when the predictable outrage occurred, would a proper response be, hey, the eye color of the character didn't change? Seriously, nobody thinks like this. Whenever a new Batman is cast, people are not worried about the eye color. Christian Bale is the best Batman, but has different colored eyes than Batman. But obviously, if we race swap Batman, that would be the bigger deal. For example, the controversy behind the Ghost in the Shell movie was not that Scarlett Johansson may or may not have the correct eye color in the adaptation. It was that she was white. And even if she did have the same eye color, do you seriously think anyone would make this argument? Like, hey, we may have whitewashed the character, but we made sure the eye color matched? No one. Race is a pretty big descriptor of a character. Famous characters like John McClane, Deckard, Walter White. I have no idea what the eye color of any of these characters are, but everybody knows they're white. So this claim and argument is stupid.
If that's the only description we have of his appearance, then going from pale-faced to dark-skinned is about as much of a difference as going from gray-eyed to blue-eyed. We're literally, like, adapting off of two sentences here.
Oh, so if going from pale face to dark skin is the same as going from gray-eyed to blue-eyed, then the argument has to say the same vice versa, because we are simply examining the magnitude of the change, the absolute value, if you will. Thus, going from blue-eyed to gray-eyed is the same as going from dark skin to pale face. So when we do whitewash a character, it's not a big deal. It's like going from gray-eyed to blue-eyed. Now, obviously, this isn't true, but this is what happens when you try to equivocate changing a character's eye color to their race. Vaush has inadvertently made the argument for whitewashing characters.
Also, not to be a stickler for detail, but pale-faced doesn't necessarily mean complexion. Pale-faced can also mean that you have a gaunt or, like, unhealthy sort of ethereal tone. You can have a pale face as a black person. It doesn't mean that your face is white-skinned, necessarily. It can just mean that it doesn't have much color in it, much red. Pale, when we talk about how people looking pale, we often mean that there's not much of a red tone in their face. Red, like flush, full of blood. That's why people look pale when they get scared. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. This is the image of said character, Black Aragorn. In what fucking universe would you describe said character as pale? Really? If we were to set up a social experiment where we asked people in their own words to describe this character with no context, without any knowledge, what percent would use the word pale? Fucking nobody, or less than 1%. We might capture a Vaush viewer in our survey, but outside of that, nobody. Continuing from his arguments, he goes on to state that a dark-skinned person could be pale. They could be gaunt. But if you know the definition of gaunt, it's referring to the appearance of a sickly individual. He states that when people get scared, they become pale. But there is a difference. Usually, pale in this context means that one loses the natural color in their face due to the current state they are in, a temporary effect of being scared, sick, or some combination of in between. unwell. But that's not how the word is being used here. It's not being used to modify the person's face from their nominal disposition. It's not saying that Aragorn got scared, so his face went pale. It's just saying that this is how Aragorn is. It's being used to describe the person's complexion, Aragorn's. That or Vaush believes that Aragorn is a perpetually sick or scared individual. I don't know. But this is also proved wrong, because if a character is dark-skinned, Tolkien has no problem specifying so, meaning that if Aragorn was black, he would have gone out of his way to state that.
Yeah, if the book explicitly said he was white, would that change your view? Well, considering the fact that I don't think the Lord of the Rings universe is meant to have, like, our races explicitly. That would be pretty weird. I think that if it explicitly said that he was white, changing that to him being black wouldn't still be that much different from changing his eyes from gray to blue, because we're talking about a fantasy universe. Making Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. white in a historical adaptation is significant because him being black is pretty important to his historical figure. Like, it's pretty important to his story. For Aragorn, though, when does his skin color come up? Ever? I'm genuinely asking because I haven't read the books. I'm a big fan of the movies, but as I understand, like there's just not an acknowledgement of real life racial dynamics in Lord of the Rings. There are unintentional allegories, but I don't think anyone ever went up to Aragorn and was like, "Hey, what's up, white boy? White boy, whoa, bro!" And then someone points at Gimli and they're like, "Slightly darker skin." Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe I don't know. In the movies, he's a little bit darker skinned. I don't know.
Now, after we have finished playing word games, even if Tolkien were to describe Aragorn as a blizzard, it still would not matter, because Lord of the Rings does not have our races. This is wrong. In the movies, we see this. We see multiple different types of people. To be fair, they are on the periphery and do not make up a huge part of the trilogy, so either Vaush forgot or he is lying to make a point.
Plenty of black cards in the set. The only black characters that I remember were pretty, like, racistly depicted. I know that there was some racist shit in the Lord of the Rings books, and then in the movie, it was like, yeah, here's the army of men who allied with the orcs and with Sauron, and it's like a bunch of, like, Arab black guys on elephants or something. That's what I remember. It's like from a million years ago, man.
I guess he forgot. This would also introduce confusion, as when we see these other groups of people, a connection would be drawn inadvertently, as Aragorn would be the one black character. Now, Vaush goes on to state two of the biggest arguments usually touted. That one, this is a fantasy universe, and two, that in the plot it does not matter what race Aragorn is. These two in conjunction are what you will hear 99% of the time from the wokes when they justify blatant racebending. That the racebending was set in some fantasy or made-up world, so it was okay. Or that was the stance they used to take, now they will blatantly race-swap historical figures as well. And that subsequently, because race does not affect the plot, who cares? The issue with this argument is it completely ignores an important aspect: world building. The same thing applies here. World building is an important part of fantasy. For the most part, the architecture in most is not an important part of the story, but it goes a long way in establishing a believable world. If you put in classic Chinese architecture in Lord of the Rings, yes, it's a fantasy world, and yes, it would not affect the plot, but it would break the world building. Just because a change fits these two criteria does not make it good, as most people would object to the aforementioned change, even those who say it's a fantasy universe and it would not affect the plot. If we constructed a fantasy universe, which had all people and races, if our story only took place within one kingdom, with other kingdoms being on the periphery, and the center of the conflict had nothing to do with race, arbitrarily race-swapping characters would still damage world building, as you would draw a connection between the race-swapped character and the corresponding civilization/kingdom, which is exactly what would happen with the race-bending Aragorn.
In the books, they're pretty explicit that there are multiple ethnicities of different races. There's like 12 hobbit. Yeah, but ethnicity and race aren't the same. And hobbits aren't a race the way black people are a race. This is, oh god, this is like the fantasy race thing, right? We have the same term for it. Like we say human race. In our parlance in real life, a race is something we only talk about for humans, and they're members of the same species. All humans are the same species. We're all Homo sapiens sapiens. Whereas like they're like, oh well, orcs are a fantasy race. They're not really a fantasy race, bro. They're a fantasy species, you know?
There is a sleight of a hand that occurs here, and I have to admit it's a pretty clever slip from Vaush. Somebody in chat goes on to refute Vaush's claims that ethnicities do not exist within Lord of the Rings. The chatter explains that multiple races have within them multiple ethnicities, as we see with the men in Lord of the Rings, for example. However, Vaush goes on to make a statement that is correct, that usually in fantasy, we are not talking about races, we are talking about species. This allows him to go on a slight tangent while still appearing to be correct, even though the argument being that Lord of the Rings has multiple different species, which within them can have various different ethnicities, directly refuting Vaush's claims earlier. But by pivoting away and talking about how fantasy properties misuse the word race, he's allowed to get away with it from the perspective of your average viewer. After he is done arguing and making poor arguments, he goes on to insult the panelist's appearance and then goes on to his analysis of the larger zeitgeist, thus concluding most arguments for Black Aragorn and moving to more general points.
But like, the pattern with these channels, none of them actually care about nerd shit anymore. They're all like bent out of shape, angry, divorced, loser, like mid-30s or later guys who don't engage in their hobbies anymore because they don't find joy in life. So they don't actually like engage with the systems or anything. If you take a look at basically any nerd scene, the most involved people who are actually on the ground, who buy the comics, who play the game, who participate professionally, they don't get mad about stuff like this. They just like the company and they like the game. Maybe liking Wizards of the Coast is not the best decision, but you know, they don't do stuff like this. It's people on the outside who don't actually participate in the community, but pretend to for the sake of grifting and trying to pull off people for like conservative rage bait.
This is a somewhat new argument, and it's incredibly frustrating, because fans are supposed to like things, and because you do not enjoy current thing, you are not a fan. This is obviously not how things work. For example, if you were to travel back to the early 2000s when the prequels came out, not liking and heavily criticizing the prequels does not make you less of a Star Wars fan. Just because you did not like or could not be bothered to care about the newest Avatar content, whether it be the live-action movie, The Legend of Korra, or the live-action show, does not make you less of an Avatar fan, as blind consumption is not what marks a true fan. The second accusation being that the individuals don't actually care. But if Nerdrotic is faking this, well, he's gone pretty deep. He ran a comic book store years ago, just so he could make videos on YouTube now. He's been building a comic book collection for years just to pose as a fan? Or is the simpler explanation that he's a fan who started a channel and is now a popular creator?
People who just want like 5 to 10 minute video snippets where they want to be reassured that at any moment all the woke crap in media is going to fall apart, even though it never has and never will. Like, literally, even Matt Walsh was like, the go woke, go broke thing is complete cope. It doesn't work. And it never has. Like, they've been doing this bit for like, for years and years now. And media just keeps getting woker. Because in reality, like, this represents a super, super, super small minority of consumers. And the vast majority of people are not, like, this mentally ill.
In terms of the channel size or these discussions, it will be a smaller section of the audience. However, Nerdrotic and crew analyze media trends and comment on larger cultural forces at work in media when they arise. And there is a silent majority out there. They are not tweeting, they're not posting reviews. They simply choose to watch or don't. The Marvel Universe is a great example. If you have been watching Nerdrotic, the current state of the MCU is no big surprise, as he not only called out that the MCU was heading down the same disastrous road as the comics, but also calling out each individual release for poor quality, leading him to make the prediction that the MCU would suffer both artistically and financially. He was correct, with MCU films starting to bomb both financially and artistically. Massive delays, reshoots, and cancellations, all in an attempt to halt the hemorrhaging viewer base and reverse course, all confirmed in multiple investor calls by the CEO himself. However, if you have been listening to other types of critics, the ones consistently giving the MCU high scores, well, you're probably perplexed as to why the MCU has gone this way. Only when the evidence became irrefutable have they come around to criticizing the MCU, engaging in revisionist history.
And look, seriously, look at what these videos are meant to appeal to. This is, whoever this blonde person is, they photoshopped snot dripping from her nose. Like, really think who these videos are meant to appeal to with this, like, Looney Tunes-ass cartoon thumbnail writing. This is like baby shit. It's meant for like babies and insecure 13-year-old boys, you know? Maybe not even 13.
I don't really care for thumbnails. There's not much of an argument. You either like them or you think they're cringe.
I just kind of like looking at thumbnails like that and reflecting on the fact that I could probably kill the average viewer of those videos with my mind by thinking about them really hard. You know what I mean? I feel like their psychic aura is very weak. You could just sort of stare at them and concentrate and they would collapse. Their life energy is just not up to snuff. I'm pretty sure that if you went back, by the way, there were probably a lot of like proto Gamergate weirdos who were calling Lord of the Rings woke, right? Like saying that Ian McKellen was gay, so he couldn't be Gandalf would be one of them. But I like there's probably a ton of shit that you could go through, or like maybe if it was taken forward to today, and you were like, yeah, well, if you like released the trilogy today, and saw how people reacted, you know?
Really? If Lord of the Rings came out today, it's the anti-woke crowd that would hate them? This is pure projection. The trilogy has faced massive pushback over the years from the woke crowd, whether it be the lack of diversity, the movie not passing the Bechdel test, the depiction of POC, how the patriarchy is positively portrayed. All of this, if the trilogy came out today, it would be people like Vaush labeling it as problematic.
But if Harry Potter looked like this guy on the left, are you seriously going to pretend that wouldn't improve the boring-ass Harry Potter movies? Redoing all of the Harry Potter movies, except Harry Potter is like the Black Dynamite guy, would be, oh my god, it would unimaginably improve everything. Okay, don't have him be British. Have him be an American exchange student, and he's from Detroit, and he's like a Black Dynamite type guy, and he's like a insanely over-the-top blaxploitation stereotype. Have him learn magic, and then just redo the entire series like that. Infinitely better. I'm not joking. It would actually be like Kino, cinema masterpiece. But like because the viewers of this channel are racist, they see this and they're like, ooh, scary. He's gonna mug me. The average black normie would listen to that bit I just did and find it funny. They would call me a real one.
I know this is a joke, but honestly, it would not surprise me if Vaush had the same reasoning for making Aragorn black as he does Harry Potter, as it would improve the film in his eyes. This video displays the types of arguments usually trotted out by those who champion race swaps and call those who disagree racist. It's not really about the actual material. Whatever argument in the moment sounds good enough is worth trotting out, even if the position is not taken and held consistently. The bevy of arguments in this video show exactly that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and consider subscribing.